Hello, and welcome to this episode of Standing Apart, the podcast that explores why being different is a superpower, with me, Nigel Ridpath. In this episode, I'm going to take an in-depth look at how people in schools are improving outcomes for children by doing things differently. I've tempted a friend of mine who headed up the art department at one of the top schools in the world to come on the show and share her experiences. More of that later. Plus, we'll have my regular feature, Superhero of the Week. If you enjoy this episode, please subscribe, rate, and like it on your favourite podcast app. It really helps spread the word. Thank you. Before we get into the interview, I want to explain what prompted me to cover the education sector in this episode. Elaine Dunkley and producer Kate McGough did a piece on the BBC at the end of January. It explored the influence of Mrs. Booth, head teacher of St Nicholas Church of England Primary Academy in Boston, Lincolnshire. It's a superb piece. The school has 4 pupils whose families are homeless. For nearly 70% of the children, English is not their first language, and 3 of the children are currently off school with tuberculosis, but Mrs. Booth suspects that the children might have been whisked off to Europe to escape debt. But despite what might be described as chaotic home lives, the school is a happy place. Assembly is one of the highlights of the school day with loud and joyous music. Mrs. Booth describes it as a lesson for the mind, body, and soul, and the hall is packed with children dancing and singing. Mrs. Booth says, "It's important for us to provide sanctuary. You know you'll be loved, you'll be fed, watered, and you'll get a hug on the gate." Wow. Mrs. Booth and her staff are doing incredible things for the life chances of her pupils, and indeed their parents. I'm reminded of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. You can't reach your potential when your belly is empty or you don't have a roof over your head. Mrs. Booth gets that. If you haven't looked at Maslow recently, or indeed at all, go and remind yourself. Maybe there is someone you know, a friend, a family member, colleague, or employee who is struggling at a higher level in the hierarchy because they're not fully satisfied at the lower levels. I'll make sure I put a link to Elaine's school article in the show notes. Take 5 minutes to read it and then give yourself 10 minutes to reflect. Believe me, you'll thank me for it. I'll also include a link to a summary of Maslow's work. And now, somewhat at the other end of the spectrum, here is my interview with Nikki Hambleton. So I'm delighted to welcome along to the Standing Apart podcast a friend of mine, a very long-standing, who has been in the education sector for all of her career. It's Nikki Hambleton. Good afternoon, Nikki.
Hello, Nigel. I thought you were going to say for a moment my oldest friend, so I was about to respond. I'm not that old, but
Yeah, no, I
but
phrased that.
long-standing friend. I like that. Thank
I
you.
phrased that very carefully. Yes, Nikki and I have known each other since we were teenagers, so that is, we must admit, some time now. Nikki, why don't we start by you giving us a little potted history of your career in education?
Well, it's interesting you said that I've been in education all my career, but actually, some people sort of forget that I started my career as graphic design. So I studied graphic design at uni and did that for about a year, but it's something that the whole idea of drawing and designing and thinking and problem solving has been something that I've just loved all my life. And so the transition into teaching art and design was quite a natural step. And it just allowed me to do everything from sculpture to drawing, painting, and so on. So But it's been quite a varied career, let's say. So I did my stint in the UK and then somehow escaped to Italy and then to West Africa in Ghana, and then the longest amount of time I spent was in Singapore as an international educator.
If we just kind of set the scene for the listeners in terms of the school that you were at, I can't remember the exact position in the league tables, but this international school that you taught at in Singapore is amongst the top 10 schools in the world.
Yeah, when we applied, it was the school that people wanted to work at and for students to go to. So it was really classed very, very high up the list, if not one of the tops. But you get swept along with it, and the students sort of help with that because they're so hungry for learning and so wanting to be the best and to get better that it makes you want to be that too.
Mm. And
Um,
so,
mm,
what was the school doing when around the time that you joined, which was what 2010,
2010.
2010? What were doing that was really standing, where how they were standing apart?
Well, I always said that we started there when laptops were introduced, but before all of that, I think what was really different about the school, it wasn't just about league tables. I mean, of course, they were, one of the best in the world for results, but what they were also doing is they still have this lovely balance between, outdoor education and academics and service and personal activities. So it was like this lovely balance of the traditional and the academics, and that still is 100% part of what the school is today, and that's, I guess, what sets it apart.
Yeah, and you were talking about the activities that the school was
Mm.
doing and the technology that they were early adopters of. It's a fee-paying school. It costs a lot of money to send your kids there, but beyond the fact that the school was just investing a lot of that money back in the programs and the technology and the teachers, I guess what I'm getting to is it just about money, or is there something else that was going on there that really made it set apart?
I think for the people on the front line, the people right there in the trenches, us, what we saw change in the kids that we teach was just phenomenal. That whole idea of the values-based school is very much where I've come from. So one of the things that the school does really well, it searches out students that they call scholars, and they pay for a student from, say, Cambodia to come and be in the school for a number of years. And that particular program, the scholars, are some of the most amazing people you would ever meet. And so they come in the school and then they want to put back into their community because they've come from nothing and they've proved their worth in their interview, and the school have accepted them onto the scholarship program. And again, that's something that just, to coin your term, sets apart the actual student body. So you've got these students who are very different and from very, very different upbringing than the students who come from very wealthy backgrounds.
Yeah. And so going back into your
Mm.
particular classroom, the art class, you were getting to the point where you were saying about how iPads really revolutionized things. Tell us a little bit more about that.
It was quite a traditional classroom. The two guys who ran the department for 15, 20 years were very traditional painter drawers. And so I came up a little bit of not a brick wall, but more of a resistance to adopting in the overall classroom. So I thought, well, stuff it. I'm just going to go ahead and see what the kids want. The kids loved it. So we started just with very simple drawing programs. But then the more that I worked with high school students, so the older students, we then started looking at using the iPads for animation. So I think what often happens when technology is adopted, you just switch out what you were doing on the paper and you use a Google Doc, or you use the graphic tablet and you draw on it as you would draw on paper. And I think what I was searching for is, what can technology do that I can't do in other ways? So animation was just incredible, and it was so easy to do on the iPad. Perhaps they've been doing rotoscope on the computer and it'd been taking them hours and hours to do. On the iPad, it was much, much simpler. And it just suddenly started getting quite exciting. We started to include a bit of AR, just doing quite different things. And the more one kid did it, the more other kids would say, oh, I like the idea of using that. I'm going to try that. And so it started to really change. And I think that one of the years when I put on a little mini exhibition that had predominantly been all drawing or painting, we looked, I think it was about 60% was digital based that the
Wow.
students had chosen to show. So
Uh,
I was like, somebody
so
said to me, you're making your mark then.
yes, yeah. The worm has turned.
Yeah.
So a couple more points from that. Did the examining syllabus keep up with that digital technology?
That is such a good question, because I don't know who's behind those walls of who are the examiners, but it took quite a lot of trial and error. But the beauty of the art curriculum as it has stood and stands now is that you show the process, and as long as the examiners see that process of making, like they haven't literally just grabbed this image and said it's mine, the fact that they can show how they're using technology to assist them, or the process of the 270 layers on Photoshop that they used in order to make that image, then the examiners can't ignore that
Right.
evidence of the
Okay.
work.
Okay. And then my next question is, I understand Apple themselves got pretty heavily involved in this.
Yeah, so I think again it was about 2012, 2013, and I was doing a few little bits and pieces with technology, and somebody said to me, "Oh, why don't you apply to be an Apple Distinguished Educator?" And I said, "What's that?" And I would say that was the beginning of my new career,
Mm,
even though I was still a teacher, because it opened me up to a whole amazing community of the most innovative and creative educators I've ever come across, who constantly share what they're doing and talk about the changes in education and in technology through whatever medium, whether that's a conference or online or social media or whatever. And it totally and utterly changed how I approached doing my art, but also that there was a balance to kind of find what I called at the time trad-digital, where there's a time and a place for digital, and there's a time and a place for traditional approaches. And I think that's really true today.
yeah. I mean, let's explore where we see the future of this going. I know a lot of work is going on in the use of AI in education. Look into the crystal ball for us, and but perhaps particularly in your area of art teaching, how can you see things shaping up, or do you think there is actually even a time horizon beyond which we cannot even imagine what
Yeah,
education might
yeah.
look
How,
like?
how can we just look at what's happened in the last, what did I say, 2010 when I first started things, and then we're now 2025, and you think about the last 2 years with generative AI, and you think,
Mm,
goodness me, how things are changing even faster right now. So I genuinely believe that there are skills that we need to be teaching students and adults in the workplace about being adaptable, being able to think, being able to change. Because if everything's changing around you and you've only got these particular skills, how on earth are you ever going to adapt and fit in? For example, one of the things that about AI that I don't really like the visual images that it produces at the moment, and I'm sure it's just in its early days, but I just feel like I can recognize them. And it got me thinking really that where students are writing essays and there's the potential for students to use AI, and there are ways that I think it's called Turnitin. There are ways now for them to search for AI driven content. Well, I think it's the same with visuals. So, how do we know what's real anymore? And I think it's even more apparent now. Teaching visual literacy is really, really important. So when we're looking at something, the same as when we're reading an article, is it fake news? Well, is this image a fake image? And if so, to what extent is it?
And let's speculate even further into the future. What do you think the role of the human teacher will be, if there even is a role?
Wow. Yeah, that I think that a lot of people get scared about that, we're going to lose our jobs. I do think that online learning it's a big part now. I think it's going to be even more important in the future. Personal learning, so we make choices. So yes, okay, mechanized ways of learning or whatever could be a real part of that, but I don't think the person should ever come out of education, because what we might notice about how a student's learning or the difficulties they're facing, let's take an example, say a neurodiverse student, would a computerized system be able to spot those little nuances that an experienced teacher of 30 plus years who's seen countless students in front of them, would they be able to notice that? Maybe, who knows? Would they be able to spot a student who's just not quite themselves, and you suddenly ask a question and they open up to a whole mental health issue or some aspect like that? And so I think the human part of teaching and education would be a real loss if that was
Mhm.
to go. Just that whole rapport. I mean, that's the bit that I love the most about teaching, just that sitting down and chatting and get to know somebody or a whole group and how the group bounces off one another.
And I think where there are some perhaps interesting insights is, you mentioned a teacher there that might spot, perhaps early signs of neurodivergence or something like that.
Mm.
But I think what could be really helpful is that AI could be used to adapt teaching methods once a teacher has spotted that sort of thing,
Yes,
because
yes,
because there are ways of presenting information and and learning to those people that might be more suitable for them than what you have to
absolutely.
do in a limited time
Yeah,
with a class of 25 or 30
yeah.
students.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
100%. I mean, at the moment there's quite a buzz around dyslexic thinking and the Dyslexic U University, and I think that the more we can work together, where we've got huge strengths and where technology has huge strengths, let's just work together. And
Mm.
surely time saving, accuracy, the human touch, everything working together has got to be a pretty beautiful future, really.
So, Nikki, you stepped back from full-time teaching a couple of years ago now.
Yeah, yeah, not quite 2 years, yeah.
So, what have you been doing since then?
Well, all these multiple things that I love talking about and love being part of, I'm trying to sort of bring them all together. So I started with looking at the struggles that students go through and how I can mentor and coach them through learning strategies, and also how visual strategies can assist and give people the confidence when going into exams. And I suppose it's that side of the visual thinking that I'm really starting to dig into a lot deeper now. So I've it's like a shameless plug here.
That's all
But
right. They're allowed.
so
It's
I've
my podcast.
started
I can do what I like.
so I was really sort of trying to work out how I could bring everything together. Like, how can I use visual thinking and visual strategies to help more than just struggling students? Like, for example, a lot of the strategies that we use in the classroom could be absolutely brilliant in a workplace where disengaged meeting or helping the quiet voices in a team meeting or something like that. So I've started to try to bring that together through this podcast that I call Rethink. And I'm sharing, it's the most ironic podcast idea you could ever think of. But I'm sharing visual strategies through an audio podcast. But I'm backing it up with little videos and visuals through my LinkedIn. So I'm hoping that people will. It's only in the early stages, but I'm hoping that over the weeks that people will find a little strategy and think, oh, okay, well, I'm going to have a go at that. I'm going to try that with my team, or I'm going to try that with my child, or whoever, just to see how that might help them think a little differently.
Well, I've had a listen to the first couple of episodes, and it's certainly got me thinking about how I might use those strategies. So I'll make sure that there's a link to your podcast in the notes for
Thank
this
you.
episode. So Nikki, listen, it's been fabulous to catch up and get your insights into the changes in education and a little bit of crystal ball gazing, which is always fun. And let's face it, no one's actually going to check whether we got it right or not. So that makes it even more fun. But Nikki, thanks very much for your time, and I'll see you soon.
Oh, it's lovely speaking to you, Nigel. Thank you so much for inviting me.
I'm fascinated, as Nikki is, about the future of education. The way we teach children has barely changed in 150 years until the early 2000s, and the rate of change in the 15-year period Nikki described has accelerated like never before. Our crystal balling might be way off the mark. Nikki feels the human teacher component is essential. I'm not so sure. But then I think back to Mrs. Booth and her team. Where we might be thinking of whether there is a need for a physical teacher in a physical classroom in the future, from an academic viewpoint, an AI cannot give a distressed 7-year-old a hug. So, what might all this mean for your business? Education has historically been very slow to change. But when educators like Nikki take a traditional subject such as art and explore the possibilities of technology, great things happen. Not only are the children more engaged, they learn skills that are relevant to the modern world. We need the world's creatives. Some of them will still sculpt and paint, but many more will create beautiful, thought-provoking worlds that can only be realized using 21st century technology. Are there any slow to adapt parts of your business that can be reimagined in a way that is wondrous by dint of its creativity or as good as a loving hug? I'll leave you with that thought. And now it's time for my superhero of the week. Before each episode, I trawl the internet to find someone or a business that is doing an amazing job of standing apart. This week, it's DeepSeek. Now, generative AI. When the UK Prime Minister starts talking about AI in every other sentence, you know it's hit the mainstream. We can't even imagine half the stuff it could be used for yet. But to use the most up-to-date models or to roll it out at scale, it's been a bit pricey. DeepSeek, though, have gone and done something rather brilliant. Out of necessity, they've built a generative AI model that's way more affordable. And that, my friends, is a proper game changer. So why is it such a big deal? Well, first of all, it's all about democratization. Lower costs means that your average Joe, your small business, even your nan who fancies writing a novel can have a crack at using this tech. Imagine a little bakery using AI to design their cake boxes, or a student using it to brainstorm an essay. It's about leveling the playing field, making sure everyone gets a slice of the AI pie. Secondly, think of the cost benefits to research scientists. They're always banging on about needing more computing power. DeepSeek's cheaper model could potentially help them analyze mountains of data and speed up their research. And thirdly, let's not forget about accessibility. Generative AI can be a lifeline for people with disabilities. Think AI-powered text-to-speech or image generators that help people see things that they can't. Making this tech cheaper means making it more accessible, and that's a fantastic thing. DeepSeek's achievement isn't just about saving a few quid. It's about opening up the world of generative AI to everyone. Because even if you don't use DeepSeek for your application, their price point is going to get the Microsofts, Googles, and Metas of this world lowering prices to keep up. It's a step in the right direction, and I, for one, am rather chuffed about it. So, my superhero of the week is DeepSeek. So, once again, we're coming towards the end of the show. I hope you found it insightful. If you did, please tell your friends. Remember, all of the previous episodes are still available, including deep dives into the retail sector, the music industry, market disruptors, and a fascinating interview with Kim Simmons about legal tech. We've got some really exciting interviews lined up over the next few months, so do stick with us and hit that subscribe button. We're always keen to hear from you, particularly for our listeners' questions feature. Please send your questions to standingapartpod@hotmail.com. We're also looking for sponsorship of the show. If you want to discuss cost-effective sponsorship options, again, please contact us at standingapartpod@hotmail.com. The show can only survive with people listening to it regularly, and no matter how good we make it, we have to beat those dratted algorithms. So every subscribe, rating, and like you give it on your favorite podcast app really makes the world of difference to us. Go on, do it now. Thank you. Until next time, whatever you do, stand apart from the crowd. Standing Apart is a Sun Bear Consulting production.